You being the expert, do you feel that crypto is going to have a greater potential in Africa? And what do you see some of the most indicting use cases? I think my audience is going to be a little bit more different and maybe the audiences you're used to. It's going to be way less technical, but I want to get into more like the philosophy of things. Why is it that you're doing what you're doing? So this is going to be more for an Africa-oriented audience. And so I would love for them to know more about you. What got you started? Who are you? What got you started? I know more about you, but just let's give you the chance to tell us.
So I'm Vitalik Buterin. I'm the founder of the Ethereum project. So I first joined Bitcoin back in 2011. I basically saw that there's this interesting project trying to create a totally new currency. I was skeptical at first, but then I decided I would properly explore it. And so I started reading more about it. I started poking into the community. I started earning Bitcoin by writing articles for some Bitcoin blogs. And then I just learned more and more about it, started doing coding. Eventually, started this trip around the world of just going around and exploring all of the world's different Bitcoin communities. And then at some point, I had the idea for Ethereum, which came about when I was talking and working with some other projects that were trying to extend blockchain technology and not just have a cryptocurrency, but be able to support financial contracts, other kinds of applications on top. And I found these ideas really fascinating. And I decided to first contribute to some of these projects and then try to help improve some of them. And then eventually, I had this idea that these things could be much better if instead of supporting a limited number of features, they had a general purpose programming language. And so suggested the idea to some of these projects, and they were actually not interested in doing it. And then I started building it myself. And that's where the idea for Ethereum came from, right? Like basically a general purpose blockchain platform. So something that brings the benefits of blockchains, that you can do things that are open, that are permissionless, where anyone can participate, that are decentralized. So there's no one person or institution that you have to trust in order for the thing to keep running. But extend these benefits not just to a currency, but to other kinds of things as well. Where Ethereum started, and since then I've been actively involved in Ethereum research and Ethereum protocol things, as well as just like a whole collection of other things inside and around the Ethereum ecosystem.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that with us. And as you may know, my greatest passion is building prosperity in Africa, right? And I believe that the greatest hope for doing that is going to be through the startup cities. I call them startup cities. I'm sure you're more aware of them as charter cities. These basically next generation zones with their own law and governance. And so I was very curious to know, what is your perspective on those jurisdictions, Vitalik? And do you believe that they have a role to play in accelerating prosperity building in Africa and the rest of the developing world?
Absolutely. And I've definitely interacted with people from the Charter Cities Institute and Mark Water and his group, as well as a bunch of others. William Masokogwane, who's doing Nakwashi in Zambia, and various other people. Yep. So definitely familiar with the space. And I think the idea of being able to create these places that have different systems of rules that kind of draw upon the best that the world has to offer, both in terms of the rules and even in terms of what kinds of structures end up implementing those rules. Like basically just create a new thing, and so it doesn't have to overturn or disrupt like any existing cities that people are already living in, and give people an opportunity to start businesses, to bring people together and cooperate internationally better, to just have a reliable, safe and friendly environments for people to do like both business and intellectual and personal life things that they want to do. It seems like something that could absolutely be very valuable for giving people everywhere in the world a chance to ideally participate in the global economy at the on the same terms as people in existing wealthy countries do.
Yeah, I like that, on the same terms. And that's really what we're asking for, leveling the playing field, right? And yeah, so I understand, Vitalik, that you're very apathetic to some version of effective altruism. So I'm very interested in finding out if you believe that the startup cities, of course, if they work, do you think that they have a high priority role to play in the effective altruism world, and why or why not? It seems to me like the effective altruism movement before all the things happened with Sam, yeah, we know that. Yeah, I never know how to say his last name, but our friend SBF, before everything happened over there, it seems like there was some type of the effective altruism movement and community was starting to nibble a little bit on this. And eventually, I don't know what happened, because for me, I don't know that I ever felt them really having bought into this. And if you're going to talk about changing the world, I've always imagined that these startup cities were going to really truly change the world by liberating billions of people around the world. But I just don't feel like they ever touched upon it. So what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. And I think you can look at effective altruism in two ways. You can look at it as a set of principles, and you can look at it as a group of people, right? And the set of principles is basically, you have some limited resources, and you're trying to help people as much as you can. And so we should, when we help people, really try hard and ask the question of, is this really the best way of helping people given the resources that we have? Or, might there be better approaches that allow us to improve a much larger number of people's lives, or improve people's lives by a much greater amount, right? And I think those principles are good. The people I've met are definitely earnestly trying to really take those principles to heart and put in money and do good things with it. But they definitely have some limitations. So first of all, this is a group of people that's generally based in places like Silicon Valley, in some cases the UK, and almost always wealthy countries. And charter cities are a movement that has generally been focused on the developing world for very good reasons, because the developing world is both a place that needs help, but also a place where there often are actually better opportunities to do these kinds of things, because there isn't as much of existing infrastructure that has 200 years of time for people to have grown really vested interest around things working the way that they do, right? I feel like they're a bit lost in the sense that, okay, this seems like a good idea in theory, but it's one of those things that's not very cookie cutter, right? If you think about things like bed nets to fight against malaria, right? It's a big effective altruist topic. I personally donated a huge amount of money to this. And it's the sort of thing that you can analyze with pure math fairly easily, right? But you got $5,000, turn that into 5,000 nets, give that to people, do some numbers and some stats, and you can basically save a human life for a cost which is actually often cheaper than a business class flight, right? And if you can put things together that way, then donating to that cause just seems like an obvious no-brainer. But at the same time, the cookie cutter and kind of safe ways of doing things are rarely the things that create the really transformative change, right? Even if we just stay on the topic of malaria, the thing that's eventually going to make people not die from malaria isn't just getting better and better at having bed nets. It's clever public health, infrastructure improvements. But two, on a much shorter term, apparently we're on the cusp of having vaccines against it now. Vaccines are deep science, and there isn't a cookie cutter way to do deep science. That involves human ingenuity, involves things that are difficult to measure. It involves, things that where, you can't do a calculation and say, if I put $1 million, I'm going to save, 275 people, right? And I think improving governance and legal infrastructure is even more that kind of problem, right? You just have to understand the deep context of what the problems are, what kinds of incentives, and what kinds of rules are actually good at improving prosperity. You have to understand the politics of getting things like that actually implemented. If you just come into a new country and you tell them, hey, I'm going to give people bed nets for free, it's not many people are going to complain, right? But if you tell people hey, here's a proposal for how new rules for a new city that's going to exist 20 kilometers away from your capital, then you have to convince people that these rules are a good idea. You have to convince them that you're not an evil capitalist and this is a plot to just extract a whole bunch of money off of them. You have to just do a whole bunch of things that basically internet computer people in Silicon Valley and London don't have exposure to. And so I think they're human beings and they stick to what's comfortable for them. And there is definitely a branch of effective altruism that's willing to explore things that are more speculative. But as we've seen, that generally means that often focusing on AI, often focusing on tech risks and things that are closer to what they understand, right? So I think, the Charter Cities movement just for it to succeed, it needs to have people who actually have on the ground experience in that domain.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because it's been one of the things that puzzled me the most, because I've been thinking, especially when I looked at the EA, I was very excited when that movement just came out. And for me to see the tech world caring about the global poor, it was very exciting at first. But then I got quickly, I was like, what's going on here? Because here are people that are supposed to be among the smartest of us, at least in some domains. And they're supposed to have big kahunas, right? Like big, hairy, goals in life. And then when it came to doing good in the world, they just went a little increment more. So basically, we're just going to do donation a little bit more, in the more rational way. Right. And measure how much the money goes. And I'm like, really? That's all you could come up with? And that's not necessarily looking down on them, but I was expecting such enthusiasm about we can and should do more. And this is where, as a matter of fact, I started completely demystifying the tech so-called geniuses, because I'm like, okay, in the end, you are still working within the same social fact of accepting that the poor people will do better if only we give to them. Rather than thinking about there's something profoundly wrong with that frame of thinking, and that instead, which one of you is really going and understanding economics 101? Not for you, Vitalik, because I think you're very different when it comes to this. But I think very few of them, I was seeing them understanding economics 101. And then from there, pointing to the business environment is actually the problem. The fact that local entrepreneurs in these poor nations don't get to enterprise, therefore the jobs are not created and the prosperity is not built. So that was very surprising to me, that they were still in this model of we're just going to give better. We don't want your money. When I heard SBF saying, we want to make as much money as possible and keep making as much money as possible just so we can keep on giving it, I'm like, we don't want that. We want to be able to make our own money. And we want to come up with our own solutions as to how are we going to tackle malaria. You know what I mean? So these are the issues we want. And I can tell you that oftentimes back home, the people who have the needs are not the ones that you're seeing dying from malaria. It is still a disease primarily of people who don't have much. So it was very interesting for me to not seeing them point to that. And now I feel like they left the promises to jump onto, like you said, AI. So I'm like, what do we do for the global poor? So what do we do now? So Vitalik, I think my question for you is, I still haven't given up on this community, because I still believe we're a community of good people who are extremely smart. And maybe we just have to do a better job of making our case. So how do you think we make a better case?
I do think that you personally have been doing a good job of making a strong case already. I listened to your interview with Lex about 1 or 2 years ago, and I definitely enjoyed it and found it fascinating.
Who are the fringes? What are the fringe of the movement or in the tech world? Because we're going to need the tech world to work with us on this. So where do you see the low-hanging fruit in terms of these people are ready for this? They're ready to hear you.
People like Mark Lutter and his group, from what I can tell, they're definitely very on the earnest and well-intentioned side of the space, and they do a good job of kind of bridging the global development world and a lot of tech people. I think a lot of the time you definitely have to look beyond Silicon Valley, just because it's the sort of place that is it prides itself on its independence, but it also has its own groupthink. And for the last 1.5 years, that groupthink has basically been that AI is the only important problem in the world. And that's something where if you're inside of that, it's pretty hard to get outside of that. But there's a lot of tech sectors that are physically located outside of there. Even Like just like the crypto community, for example, right? Like it's definitely nowhere near as large as like the AI space, for example. But I think one of the things that I personally really like about it is just how it has actually managed to be really independent from a lot of the like existing tech powers, right? If you can even see this geographically. Like if you look at the Ethereum Foundation, our largest physical office is probably in Berlin, right? And we've got people in Berlin. We've got people actually on our privacy and scaling team, which is working on like zero knowledge proofs. Actually, the bulk of the people there are located in Southeast and East Asia. There's surprisingly large amounts of them in Vietnam. Unfortunately, not too many in Africa specifically yet, but this year. Exactly. This year, Joseph Ayala, do you know him at all?
I heard of him.
Yeah, he organized the trip for around Africa for me in February, and he has been really stepping up lately as trying to build that community. One big rising star there. Hopefully we'll see a lot more of those. Yeah, but there's definitely people in these kind of spaces who have money. And the crypto space in particular, I think the other interesting thing is like, it really deeply thinks about governance, right? A lot of the criticism of like traditional tech and traditional finance basically boils down to the fact that they never thought about governance, right? Like they created these big platforms and they made them in the way that's completely centralized, and they let themselves get caught in the delusion that there's these like invincible castles in the sky. And even a lot of the world ended up going along with this for a while. And then eventually you realize, wait, they are based somewhere and they are subject to like political winds and cultural winds. And like the financial system, it's like similarly, whether a bank survives or fails depends a lot on like basically like politics and whether or not it's too big to fail and all of these things. And the crypto space actually, emerged in reaction to this, right? Like, early Bitcoin rhetoric was all about like, we don't want to be like the traditional financial system that's just like letting these banks like get really powerful and then basically not even trying to punish them when they end up almost collapsing the economy, right? And a lot of the non-financial side of the world is trying to do things like decentralized identity solutions, for example, right? Create forms of identity that don't like tie themselves around a particular government or particular institution, trying to create, like more open alternatives to, like things like Google and Twitter and Facebook, not just as social networks, but even as, like ways that we log into things. For example, I remember there was this one, I forget which service, but there was like one service that had this, like some centralized tech service, I think, that had this problem that they required phone numbers to log in, but then they basically flagged like pretty much one of the major Indian telecom carriers as being untrustworthy. And so a few hundred million people were just not able to access it. So there's, I think, interest in like serving the people around the edges that don't get caught up by the center, whether it's people who are trying to defend themselves against authoritarian regimes or people that are just not connected to the world because the world doesn't care about them or just assigns their security risk. So those strands exist. And I feel like obviously at the same time, crypto has made a lot of people very rich. And some of the people who are very rich are people who have these kinds of ideals, right? Like they value personal freedom, they value capitalism, they value internationalism, the idea that we are one people and one world, and we're trying to do our best to connect everyone. And I think there are people there that could be reached out to participate in these kinds of things more actively. I think the ideological alignment, it does exist. It just needs to be awakened well and in the right way. Basically, the kinds of spaces that aren't fully invested in the idea that the AI is the only important problem in the world, right? I do think that AI is really important and worth thinking about, right? Because to the extent that it's a big productivity improvement, it is a productivity improvement that should be available to everyone, right? I think I just learned that the OpenAI does not accept Chinese credit cards, and so Chinese people are basically stuck using ChatGPT 3.5 through a VPN. I mean, I'm not sure how true this is, but I've heard this once, so don't accept it as gospel, but there's enough things that are like this that we know to be true that it has a pretty high probability.
Yes, it's probably. Wow. But I agree with you on the crypto part. And definitely one of the questions that I had for you was, what was going to be your take on crypto in Africa? But I think you answered that, because when you were talking about But maybe you can tell us if there's much more you can add on that. Do you think that crypto has a greater potential in Africa, and also for what kind of use cases? Because one of the things is, like for me, for example, I'm a big believer in crypto. For me, it's part of a toolkit, right? Along with the startup cities, I would like to see the startup cities be powered by cryptocurrencies, right? Except that for me, I would like for the choice to be given to people. I'm not going to be one of the people who says, there has to be this one or that one or whatever. It's give people the choice, let the markets work, and let people go for what they decide. And, but the problem we're having oftentimes, whenever I'm promoting crypto for Africa, then we fall back into the reasons why crypto is being demonized in the Western world, because it's seen as a asset value class and all of that stuff. And I'm just like, but you don't understand why crypto is so important for us Africans. So you being the expert, do you feel that crypto is going to have a greater potential in Africa? And what do you see some of the most indicting use cases?
Yeah, I think it's not just potential, right? It's like being used in a lot of ways already, right? I know there's, when I visited, I talked to a bunch of fintech companies that are just already using stable coins to move money between African countries more easily. I saw the Ethiopian and Kenyan NFT community, which I found fascinating. Like that, they definitely feel like they're higher quality and have more of a kind of an actual soul than the New York City $30,000 monkey people. There were people seriously discussing, can you do a kind of crypto play to earn? There were people seriously discussing taking some of these traditional African ideas around doing collective pools for insurance and savings. Yeah, but there was a term for this. It's chadas or something, right? I know there's different terms in different countries.
Yeah, we have, I think, are you talking about our way of collecting savings, like the Soussous in Ghana, and we have Tontine in Senegal? Yep.
Yeah, so there's people thinking about, can you take ideas around DAOs and basically use those to implement things like that better?
Right.
Yeah, so there's people exploring things, and then there's just the plain old regular usage by people that's just happening, right?
Yeah.
I think, the thing that doesn't get reported on the most is just kind of individuals quietly doing doing their thing because they've just discovered a way that it's useful for them, right? If people are using crypto for remittances, there is no quote crypto remittance company that gets a huge market cap, right? And the reason why is that you don't really need the crypto remittance company. You basically just on the US or European or whatever side, you have an exchange, you have your Coinbase, you send in money, convert it into stable coins, send them over. And then on the African side, you just have another exchange. In Argentina, for example, that I've visited a bunch of times, right? It's pretty similar, right? You just have local exchanges and people know how to use USDC, USDT, Bitcoin, ETH, whatever they like. Generally, it's if you're just pragmatic, then start off getting into USDC and maybe USDT, but then eventually people come for the pragmatic savings value, and then they discover and stay for the ideals, and then people get interested in other cryptocurrencies as well. And that's it's just people either buy through exchanges, or sometimes they just ask other people to pay them in whatever crypto instead of in dollars, and it just works, right? I feel like there's a lot of that happening too. Yeah, so I think there's definitely a big opportunity for things like this to expand. I think in terms of the challenges for it to expand, one of them is just on the technology side, blockchains themselves just need to be good enough to actually support all of this really high level of usage. What I mean by this is right now, the chains are not scalable enough, right? And there's lots of people that want to do stuff. And the result is that there's pretty high transaction fees, right? And I remember in Argentina going to some of these people accepting crypto, and I tried paying. And when I pay, I just use actual on-chain wallet. I was using Status. And I remember the transaction fee was somewhere between $1 and $5. And the transaction took something like 7 minutes to confirm. And then, but what the locals do is usually they have Binance accounts, and Binance to Binance transfers are free and instant. And that's, on the one hand, it's good that it's that option exists. But on the other hand, it's we know what happens when centralized exchanges get too powerful and people start depending on them too much, right? And I think we want alternatives, and this is something that even a lot of the centralized exchange people themselves don't disagree with, right? A lot of them are. Exactly. Yeah, it's a limitation. And like if the technology improves to the point where like the chain itself can provide better functionality, then like that, it's like we take away that limitation. And with some of the improvements that have happened to Ethereum over the last 3 years, like things have improved a lot, but they need to improve more. Yeah. So that's one side. And then the other side is just education. Basically, a lot of the time, the big challenge is like the good people have to like front run the scammers and like not get front run by them. And that's just something that I think just requires just a good public spirited efforts from a whole bunch of local people in all of the local communities. And because if you don't have that, then you're going to have the Luna people come in promising 19% interest rates, and like a lot of not very well educated people are unfortunately going to fall for that.
No, and I know, because for me, what I've been trying to really stress to my fellow Africans is that we should not be looking, at least you'll never see me promoting currency to someone as as a speculative tool. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when the problems arise. When you have people who are barely making it by putting their money into this stuff, but still quite speculative, or it's very volatile. It's very volatile. Then of course, if you're not in it and you're able to hang on to it and hold and go through the ups and downs, then you got what you got. The problem we're having is people who are using it for speculative reasons. And then all the horror stories that happen there is what, in a way, seems to be spoiling the well in terms of the reputation for cryptocurrency in places like Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Vitalik, you are quite known for your innovations in governance within the Ethereum ecosystem, which is really, really wonderful. I have to confess, I was just reading another one of your white papers, and I haven't finished it yet, but quite interesting there. And my question for you is, do you believe that some of the innovations that you have been working on and uncovering for Ethereum could actually work or be applied to the startup cities in real life? What have you seen that you think could be transferable?
Obviously, they can benefit from just like cryptocurrency and stablecoins. But I think if you go deeper than that, one of the big technology areas that was like really born and incubated in the crypto community that can benefit a lot more people is zero knowledge proofs, right? And the reason why zero knowledge proofs are powerful is because they let you prove things that you want to prove, while at the same time keeping the data private that you want to keep private. One example of this is if you want to just do better digital voting, for example, right? And I don't even necessarily mean very big stuff like voting in elections. I even just mean potentially petitions, polls, smaller scale elections, even going all the way down to just social media voting, right? One valuable thing to have is for votes to be private, right? Because if votes are public and someone can see how you voted, they could potentially retaliate, potentially bribe people to vote in a particular way, do all kinds of things, right? And with zero knowledge proofs, you can vote and you can prove that you are one of the people who has a right to vote and prove that you haven't voted yet, all without revealing which specific voter you are, right? Voting is one aspect. Identity and reputation is another aspect. If you want to prove things about yourself, for example, proving that you're a member of a particular organization, or even like proving that you have a certain set of like attestations that say that you have enough like work experience in a particular area, prove all kinds of things, right? Like you can basically just have those attestations kind of stored privately, be part of your data. And then if you want to prove that to other people, you generate a proof of the specific thing that you want to prove, give that proof to another person. They can verify the proof. They know that the specific claim that you want to prove is true, but then they don't see any of the underlying data that generated the proof.
Interesting.
Yeah. Have you heard of Zuzalo before? This small pop-up city experiments that we did in Montenegro earlier this year.
Yeah, I read about it.
Yeah, like basically trying to just bring 200 people together, create this kind of experimental startup pop-up city, and basically just bring together a couple of different communities, bring together people from all around the world, and just see what happens as a result. And one of the experiments that was done in that was the 0x Park team, which is pretty not part of the Ethereum Foundation, but close to it. They do a lot of zero knowledge proof work. They created an app called ZooPass, which basically is like a zero knowledge identity system, right? So you could prove that you're a resident without revealing which resident you are. And then you could use that to log into things. You can vote. There's this thing called the Zoo Stamps, which are basically these like attestations that you can prove. So it basically was like a live implementation of this this exact kind of identity and reputation system. And we actually managed to use it and like in this kind of small test environment, and it actually works pretty well.
Wow. Have you done research? Are you going to have a paper on this, on I hope you've
Yeah. So there's been like various documents that have been written in progress. ZooPass itself is open source and it's on GitHub somewhere. I can look that up right now. I think they might have renamed themselves PCDpass. Yeah, github.com/proof carrying data/ZooPass. It's like right there. There's that. There's been a lot of things that just got written up. I know Janine, who really helped organize it, has a document in progress that's just documented for learnings there in general. So
that's fascinating. And I think I saw the article that you had on the Palladium Substack.
Yeah.
I think you had one recently. So that one I did see, and that's really interesting. But as I hear you speaking, Vitalik, on this, I am wondering about, could it be possible to apply this to the next generation social media, especially this whole idea of mixing voting with identity, with reputation? I really feel like those are, especially the reputation part, is what's missing so much from our social media. So do you feel like there could be application? I'm right now, just because you were saying this, it came to my mind. So definitely not something that I wanted to go into, but if you have just 1 minute, I'd like comment on that, because I'm wondering about that. What could be the role of something like this in the really strong moderation that's not handled by a centralized party when it comes to social media, so that we can maybe have better quality social media? Or those of us who want that could. Do you think there's something there?
I think there is absolutely something there. And I think, to me, like some of these new Ethereum-based social media platforms that are coming out, like particularly Lens and Farcaster, are the two that I'm watching the most closely. I see those as being big opportunities to like actually try to experiment with doing some of that. And they have developers and communities that are super interested in doing exactly that sort of thing. The thing that like they've been doing right now is basically you can log in with an Ethereum account, and so you can do things like just like account recovery and have your account that do everything without having to go through phone numbers or Google or anything like that. But I think, I've talked to them about using zero knowledge proofs for things like voting, and even zero knowledge proofs for things like just attesting to, like, basically the equivalent of like Twitter blue verification, right? Like attesting that you're probably a person instead of possibly one of 250,000 bots that's run by a hostile government or something. It's something that they're interested in. I'm looking forward to seeing things like that happen.
Yeah, and keep me posted on what you're seeing as well, because I really feel like that's going to be the part of what's going to save social media as we know it. And then when it comes to how innovation, government, and governance as different from democracies or autocracies, dictatorships, and the simplistic way we have to look at these different poles of governance, right? So when you're thinking about that, are you thinking that there's a potential for widespread understanding and adoption of these new innovations in governance? Do you feel like because I am very interested in all of that. I'm one of those people who believes that democracy as we know it, I'm quite done with it, but I'm also another dictator. So we got to find better ways. And how do you see all of that playing out?
There's absolutely a lot of new ideas that are being tried out, both inside the crypto space and in like increasingly in some other places as well. Like there's like newer forms of voting. There's actually, I don't know, have you seen the post that I made on Twitter's community notes algorithm? This is like my second most recent blog post, but I recommend it. The idea is interesting, right? Basically, it tries to identify the posts, like to choose which community notes pop up on a particular tweet. It doesn't just check which ones have the most votes. It checks which ones have the most votes among people who normally disagree with each other. So it kind of, and it seems to have given them a pretty good result so far. So that's like ideas like that. I think there's this big sub community like within Ethereum that's really interested in those kinds of things. I think a really big opportunity is to try to incubate these kinds of better governance, and I think try them out in these like smaller crypto contexts first, then try them out actually in like startup cities as well, and scale them up over time.
And then personally, are you also looking at startups these, or are you right now mostly only onto the network states concept and models?
I don't really view myself as like a network state person in particular. I think there's like a large cluster of ideas that have like different names, different philosophies, and it feels too early to really start like getting into tribal war of one model versus the other. So one of the goals of Zulu, for example, for me was basically to like that, like there's been so much like theoretical discussion and back and forth blabbing, and let's try something real and let's like learn from the real thing. And like and I feel like it actually has already had that effects to some extent, right? Actually, there is at least 3 spin-offs of Zulu that are happening now, and they're going in different directions. Some of them have been gravitating towards is basically like being in this sort of 21st century, like semi-decentralized university, right? Like basically, like really appealing to people in the like 18 to 25 age range, and like basically doing the thing that universities do, which is fundamentally like taking frontier research and technology development and learning and putting them together because the two complement each other well. And they're really doing it in a way that's like really like engaging a lot of people and like helping a lot of people learn and get up to scale on all of these new technical areas. And they're just like happening in all kinds of places around the world. There is one happening in Thailand and Chiang Mai right now called Mu. And there's just like a bunch of people came there and like they're just learning like all kinds of programming topics every day. So I think like one of the morals that I take away from this story is like, if you read like Balaji's book, like he has like his own very specific things that he, like cares about that and that he wants to see in the world. But then the idea, like plays out, and sometimes it turns out that the ideas like also can be twisted a bit, and like it actually provides a lot of value for people for a like somewhat different reason as well. Like, so this is why I don't really see myself as being like super in favor of one model versus another model. Like I just wants to see like a couple of small to medium versions of like the big model is out there, and let's like earnestly try them and do a good job of making them work for people, and then see what we learn and expand from that.
That's really cool. That's really cool and good to hear. And then last question for you, Vitalik, is when through time and as I got to discover more, and because at first I was like, Vitalik, it seemed to me like he's so into his world of all the things that you do, but then somewhere in there, you can see that you're someone you really care. It comes across. Yeah, you seem to have these principles. So my question for you would be, Vitalik, why do you care about Africa? Why do you care about Africa? Because this is, I feel like the world as we know, especially in the Western world, the continent seems to be forgotten by them. When they think about it, most of them have written it off. And why do you, Vitalik, care about Africa? Because I know you do, but why?
Yeah, I think it comes back to like something that I said earlier, which is it's a place that is, first of all, just has a really huge amount of people, right? And just going to be incredibly important to the world over the next century, regardless of what happens. And a place where there's, on the one hand, very big challenges, but on the other hand, also a lot of opportunities for very serious improvements in people's lives. And not just in Africa, but eventually Africans providing more and more things, whether it's, like participating in technology or like intellectual space or culture to the rest of the world. And I think, like the fact that this is a place where there aren't like in existing like 200 years of people having frameworks that they're already convinced are the correct way of doing things, where they're bought into them, and like it's like can't be changed. Like it's like it feels open to possibilities, and I think that's something that's really worth the world engaging with.
I really appreciate that, Vitalik. It's really beautiful sentiment, and I think it's important for people to hear people like you talk about this, my continent that I love so much and I have so much faith in. For people to hear you talk about it so positively. So thank you. And I can tell you that you're right on with that. And beyond this, when you were saying it's not like they have been doing something for the past couple 100 years the same way and thinking this is the way. I think for me, the greater promise also lies in what and who we were prior to slavery. And when you go back to those times, I know that I've been tinkering and playing a lot with the concept of critarchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my next book is actually going to be about that. And basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go back to critarchy, bring back the good elements of it. But right now I'm trying to work a critarchy that would be modernized for 21st century, right? Where also the rights and of minorities better respected and protected. And that's something that I'm going to try to bring back as my alternative to democracy as we know it. So different form of governance, because back in the days, so many of us, we were like tribes maintaining the peace among each other. We had various ways of doing that, but we had completely decentralized power. And so I think there's a way to come back to that. You know what I mean? So for all those reasons, I'm with you. And so I would take it, Vitalik, bullish or down on Africa? It seems like your answer is pretty
bullish. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. Vitalik, this has been really fun for me to get to know this side of you. It's been really great. Anything that you would have liked to add to any of this, or a message we didn't run into that you would definitely want to make sure that Africans on the continent get to hear? On the continent, also here, anywhere.
Just random thoughts in different directions. Actually, the thing that impressed me in particular about the African NFT movement is that the big cultural movement that they're like a lot of them are part of is this idea of Afrofuturism, right? The reason why it impressed me is basically because it feels like there's an earnest desire to preserve cultural continuity, but also be relevant to the things that are happening with technology and the future and the 21st century at the same time. And those are things that usually do not go together, right? Usually the people focused on preserving culture just want people to keep living in cottages all day. And living in cottages feels romantic, but then you just realize that actually it just means that some people, and in practice, usually the women have to work for many extra hours a day on doing boring stuff, and you have worse healthcare and all kinds of things. But ultimately, I think humanity is going to the moon, and Africans should absolutely deserve to go to the moon too. And having just a culture that does both of those at the same time, like that, I don't know, that impressed me. I'm super positive on that. In terms of what needs to happen, I think the one big thing is just better integration between this is just speaking for the Ethereum community, just better integration between the people in Africa and people in the rest of the world, just on a community level, right? So for example, the thing that I think the crypto space does in better than a lot of existing tech community is the average crypto elite who is American has at least a couple of Chinese friends, right? And vice versa. And that's not something that's true for most other tech spaces. But the thing that's not yet true is the average crypto elite in America having African friends. And for that to happen, I think you need a coordinated effort. Another thing, obviously, is the whole just visa situation that Africans are unfortunately on the currently getting a very rough end of, right? In Montenegro, we tried really hard to make it easy for Africans to get there, and just unfortunately ended up just totally breaking in all kinds of ways. And that's while we can't fix the world yet, just hosting events in places where Africans can come, which includes Africa itself, of course.
But even though, Vitalik, within Africa, you wouldn't, I'm ashamed to say that. It's just worse trying to even Africa. For that, actually, you might be very happy to hear about the initiative I'm working on. It's called the Cheetah Generation. It's not about age. It's not about are you African, not African. It's not about are you living on the continent or not. It's about do you have this mindset? The cheetahs basically are these fast runners of Africa, these entrepreneurs that are not going to wait for anyone to get things done. But basically the future of Africa lies on their backs. And my new book that's just coming out in November, I'll make sure I send you a copy. But basically, it's called The Heart of a Cheetah. And really, the book is 80% about setting up the record straight as to why Africa is the poorest region in the world, despite all of its riches. And most importantly, 20% of the book is how do we get there? And the solutions, the most radical one is going to be the startup cities. And so what we're trying to do with that is to basically create a cheetah generation. This is where all the people who believe that, all the people who, like you, are bullish on Africa, are saying we believe there is a very bright future for Africa because there is a roadmap for this, then come together and start building these alliances at all levels, in all sectors. So I'm really trying to see if we can integrate Africa to the rest of the world and integrate the rest of the world into Africa, because I really think that's going to be needed. And I think at some point, maybe even some of us are going to have to work. And I think it's doable where some of the major countries, especially whether it's the US or some parts of the EU, I would like to think of, can we work on a specific, maybe have an umbrella where we can sponsor some of the people we want to bring over for visas for them to come visit for the conference or whatever, and be able to go back. I have to believe that it's possible because so many of us are so well connected. There's got to be something we can put together where we can't have that happen for everybody, unfortunately, just yet. But maybe that's something we should work on, because this is a huge problem. The fact that our people can't move around more freely to attend conferences where knowledge is being exchanged, to attend conferences where connections are happening. We're just disconnected in the most artificial way. So while we can't do that for all 1.4 billion Africans for now, can we organize little sectors where we can work with some of our friends in the public sector in the US? We certainly do have friends at the State Department and things like that. Can we try to work out something where, that's possible? Maybe I'm just being a utopian, but I think it's possible. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think nothing wrong with being utopian sometimes. Let the real world multiply your utopia by a quarter before it gets to the world. You don't have to do that yourself.
That's right. Yeah. So hopefully we get somewhere there. We'll share some information with you about it. I hope you are able to join the movement. But yeah, we're trying to make the world a little bit smaller.
Absolutely. No, that sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much for this time, Vitalik. Let's make sure we stay in touch. And if you have questions for me or anything that you want to send my way in terms of support material, let me know. And we'll be sharing with everybody else within the next few weeks.
Sounds good. Okay.
Thank you.